I felt no pain in that vast vacuum on the other side. Due to my lack of physical sensation, I regretted. I wish I'd stayed because I wasn't hurt. Everyone seemed to be waiting for a happy reunion, and being on the other side was fine. Hi everyone, thanks for listening today. We stopped to thank the community. It's lovely to watch this community come together in the comments as many of you help each other through bereavement. That's why we teamed with BetterHelp, the world's premier online therapy platform. BetterHelp matches you with qualified therapists who listen and offer impartial guidance. They can help with depression, grief, anxiety, relationships, trauma, and more. Use the link in the video description to support this channel and get 10% off your first therapy month. BetterHelp lets you text, call, or video chat. You can usually find a therapist within 48 hours and plan appointments at your convenience. You can even transfer therapists for free. If you've lost someone or are suffering, consider BetterHelp. Get 10% off your first month of therapy by clicking the link in the description. Hello, I'm the author of The Man Who Kept Dying, and I like to joke that I kept dying. My near-death experience occurred in early 2018. Before sharing that incident, I should explain that I had dealt with death many times before 2018. I saw death for the first time at 1 month old. Parents drove me to meet my grandparents for the first time as a newborn. An automobile collision occurred. Recall that car and child safety were inferior in the 1980s. In essence, I flew inside the car. My parents found me crying and upset about the mishap, which didn't hurt anyone. I was too young to remember that accident, but my parents told me I had a tremendous fear of death for years after the car accident, whether related or not. I always worried that if I died, I would have to return. I didn't know what, but I always feared death. Later, when I was 10, I had 2 emergency surgeries. They were severe, but I survived. But I still wondered why that was occurring to me so young. After a few years, I have another vehicle accident at 17. I was a passenger when the driver lost control, and we crashed on the road. I remember taking the whole hit as a passenger in the front seat. Before blacking out, I thought, that's it, I'm dead. There's no way I can survive that. I woke up by the road a few minutes later. I saw a blue sky and a broken automobile behind me. I was curious about what happened. Yes, we had an automobile accident. Just reviewing what happened before. A few weeks later, when I saw images of the car and its condition, I was more surprised. It was completely flattened where I sat. How is it possible that I survived with only a few scars? Looking at the pictures, I should have been dead. If not, the accident would have squashed me. I'm 6'4", and I was probably 6'2" or 6'3" when I was 17. This brings me to a conversation I had with my grandmother when I was 18 to 20. I've always had a good relationship with my grandparents and family, but especially with both of my grandmothers. We could have deep conversations about life or everything. They were cool. I remember saying, I really wonder why, with me meeting death so many times. I'm aware that many individuals are going through far worse ordeals than we are, but I'm also aware that many die from a small occurrence. Why has death struck me 4 times? Every time it could have been serious, yet here I am, and nobody would know if I walked in the street. Despite a few scars, I'm capable. So it's unusual for me, and I feel like death is hunting me. She smiled, and her answer has stuck with me. She paused and said, well, I suppose you have yet to complete what you came here to accomplish. I was astonished and asked, but what is it that I have to accomplish then? She replied, it might be as simple as having kids and raising a family, or living your best life. One of your desires? I'd reply, well, I would love to go and live in an English-speaking country. She said, well, just follow that. I'm sure that one day there will be an opportunity that will lead you to live in an English-speaking country. Just snatch the opportunity when it comes. Because otherwise, yes, you would have died a long time ago if you did not have something special to do. Life goes on. I go to university, start my profession, and soon, as she said, I can go to an English-speaking country. What better nation than the UK? I enjoyed it professionally. I could advance my job and enhance my English because living in a country forces you to understand the language, customs, habits, and culture. You'll find it easier in the country. Professionally, everything goes well until January 2018. I had nothing to complain about on paper. Life, I live in a fine English house, drive a nice car, have a wonderful profession that pays well, and am married to my soulmate. On paper, everything is okay. Except I hate my work. I'm unhappy, high pressure, and doing the work of 3 people. And there are many restructurings. It's draining me emotionally. I'm also considering becoming an osteopath. I've started training. I have massage therapy certifications and am studying osteopathy for years. I work during the day, study in the evenings, and travel to perform part of my studies in person on weekends, so life is really busy. I remember thinking, that's too much. I cannot really handle that many items in my life. Like I'm spinning too many plates. 2 days before the near-death experience, my wife and I were at a restaurant having that conversation again. The right side of my abdomen feels like a dagger penetrating the skin, strong, sharp, and painful. And it happened suddenly. We go home after dinner, but this feeling persists. It's stronger and spasms more, and I can't sleep. I can't sleep when sweating. In the early morning, we call the emergency services, 999 in the UK, and they say, well, you need to go to the hospital to be checked. We drive to the hospital, see a doctor, and she says, I believe you just have indigestion because you've been to the restaurant the night before. It's very possible you've had bad food and got food poisoning. Very strong food poisoning. It feels like food poisoning, but not the same. Different this time. She gives me medication, which helps so I feel better immediately. Maybe she's right, I think. Maybe it was simply that, and my system isn't used to it. But she says, if the problem doesn't improve or worsen, call us back and we'll advise. We go home, too exhausted to walk all Friday. I feel better on Friday, but it returns from Friday until Saturday night. Pain seems to increase again and again. I recall saying, I really feel like I'm dying. It was agonizing and a realization that your body is failing you and you can't handle the pain anymore. You don't comprehend your situation. Physically and emotionally, it's difficult. We contact 911 again early Sunday morning, and this time they send an ambulance to our home. A paramedic finds me on the living room sofa a few minutes later. Of course, he says, what's been happening? I feel like I'm repeating that narrative 3 times in 3 days. He takes notes. He nods and gives me an IV with a painkiller because you really are in physical pain. We need to make sure we stabilize you a little bit on that front. I recall the uncomfortable feeling of the IV fluids pouring down my veins. Strangely, that doesn't immediately relieve the ache. He gives me a mask of medicinal gases and says, you take a couple of deep breaths with that mask and you should start to feel better. I do, and I'm in a new world. Nothing surrounds me as I drift in darkness. I don't remember being in pain on my living room sofa just now. Just drifting in that dark space is almost all that matters. It feels like a break, and it's good. I have no emotions or sensations, but I'm unaware. After a while, I see a faint light in the distance. The moment I gaze at that tiny spark of light, it grows bigger, or I'm moving toward it at light speed. Not sure which is which. However, I see that large circle or sphere of light as I approach. I see 4 silhouettes waiting for me in the light. I saw 3 of them around the same size and height, and the 4th one, to the right, was incredibly tall and in the background. It intrigues me. I come closer to the light and recognize those people or beings even though I can't see their faces. It seems weird, like opening the door to someone you don't know, but no. That feeling is weird. They feel more like family to me than my own family right away. The fact that I haven't seen them in so long makes me very happy. I also sense cheerful energy from the other side. However, when I realize I know them but cannot see them, I recognize that this is bad since seeing them indicates I'm dead or dying, which I don't want. For some reason, my wife springs to mind first. I understand I'm too young in my early 30s. I have much more to live and experience. I shouldn't leave yet. I combine English and French at that moment because I want my message to be clear. I said to them, those entities in the light, no way, désolé, which means not now in French. So no, thank you. I don't want that to happen. And I can feel the other side's non-resentment. It's more like, okay, well, that's what you want, that's fine. And I'm dragged back down a tunnel and recombine my body. Now, while I'm on the sofa, my wife is patting my shoulder and looking frightened. She says, "Are you okay?" And I look bewildered because I'm wondering, what am I doing here again? And notice the paramedic taking notes behind me. I look around and say, where was I just before? My wife asks me again, "Are you sure? Are you okay?" I respond, "Yes, I am." Then I take the mask that fell on the floor. I think, I've just had a hallucination, quite a strong one at that. So I'm pretty certain if I breathe the gases again, I'm going to replicate another hallucination. But nothing occurs. My wife appears perplexed now. She doesn't get my point. After a few seconds, the ache returns. My body now hurts 10/10. I understand then that I was pain-free on the other side, floating in that dark nothingness. No bodily sensation. I regret that moment. Since I was pain-free, I should have stayed on the opposite side. Everyone seemed to be waiting for a happy reunion, and being on the other side was fine. I think I've made a mistake, so I try again to breathe the medical gases to send myself back to the other side. But nothing happens, and the paramedic turns around and says, "Well, listen, it's pretty bad. We have to rush you to the hospital. You're in pretty serious condition." So I'd forget about the NDE and so on because I'm rushed to the hospital quickly. "One of your 10-year-old procedures is the cause," they say. I'm dumbfounded. How can this happen 23 years later? However, they stated that I didn't heal completely from that earlier surgery and was living with a ticking bomb. That ticking bomb could have exploded 20 years ago, 20 years later, or now. It may have never detonated, but you have to deal with the situation now. They told me we may need a major operation to fix the problem, so we try non-invasive treatments first. I get surgery because I have no option. At that moment, I had forgotten about the NDE, but I remember being quite confident that I would sail through that episode in my life because deep down, I was like, I know that I've decided to come back to this life even though I don't remember specifically why or how. I felt many peaceful presences encouraging me to stay calm and that everything would be fine. I visited with a wonderful surgeon and we discussed surgery options. After surgery, he told me that he performed the bare minimum and that if I had been an older patient, he would have done more because we've had all these conversations before and that I was young and fit. So I'm pretty certain you will recover with the bare minimum. However, we cannot rule out any risk of that reoccurrence if you like. I was just glad I survived. And it took 18 months to recover to 100% capacity, and the first 6 months were 70 to 80%. Another 6 months, 10%. I was too heavy to draw or open the drapes the last 6 times. My recovery was rapid and good. Only, I still feared death because I knew it could happen again. Every time I had a painful sensation, I thought, well, maybe that's going to happen again. I do not want to go through those pains. It was just too painful to go through physically and emotionally also. I decided to finish the osteopathy study for the year, but not continue, and I changed jobs. Moving to a better place and reassessing life was my decision. It was intriguing that I forced myself to appreciate life more. I was too concentrated on my profession to enjoy life before that. Now I'm pushing myself to appreciate life and the rehabilitation process, even though it's not always fun. I'd say 2018 was a terrific year. It started poorly, but after what transpired, I was optimistic. I was still afraid of death, but my mother shared an NDE article with me out of the blue. I don't know why she found it interesting. I started reading that article one evening about a French doctor who was captivated by NDs and wanted to understand them. He worked with a hypnotherapist to create a procedure that put people in the same state as an NDE, but without the physical limits or emergencies. I advise people not to have a near-death experience because it indicates a major health issue. Simply put, don't attempt. As I read the article, the author described how he went through the hypnosis session, found himself floating in a dark void, felt so alive, saw beings in the light, met them, and was taken to different places and the spirit side. It reminded me of something I couldn't pinpoint, but I felt like I'd lived that experience. I don't remember when or where. However, if I had such an encounter, I would never forget it. The recollection returned. I remembered the near-death experience that morning while lying on the sofa inhaling medical gases and being transported to the hospital. But I wasn't sure if it was a delusion or real. I asked my wife, "Hey, Do you remember anything specific happening on that Sunday morning before I was rushed to the hospital? Since you were caressing my shoulder and seemed frightened." She paused, her face went pale, and she said, "Well, I've never really wanted to say it to you, but I thought you were dead." I asked, "How so?" She explained that the paramedic was taking notes and wasn't paying attention to me, that I had dropped the mask, and that my eyes were open but lifeless. I said, "Literally, it was not like you. Your body was lifeless. There is something quite specific about it." She said, "I went by your side, ready to scream. I touched your shoulder, called your name, and you didn't react immediately. After 2 to 3 seconds, you came back to consciousness, but you looked confused. You stared at me like, 'What's up? Where am I?' And at that moment, I was like, 'Well, I'm just happy you're back here,' essentially." So I proceeded to tell her about the near-death experience I had had. For me, the fact that it lasted between 3 and 5 minutes in my perception of time, but for her, it was just like 2 to 3 seconds. And so that difference of how we interpret time, depending on where we are, for me, it was a fantastic acknowledgement and confirmation that it had not been a hallucination. And actually, she was there. She was my witness for the fact that it had really taken place. And at that moment, too, what had happened, it lifted an immense weight from my shoulders. The fear of death had disappeared instantly. And to me, it's like I was just giving death the big hug and saying, "Hey, thank you for showing to me that actually there was nothing to fear." It's just a transition because now I know for sure, and I've lived it and experienced it, that my consciousness is going to continue after my life as we know it ends. And that to me was such a relief in itself. And I know that on the other side, there's a sort of realm that is waiting for me and that I'm going to reunite with, although I don't know who they are. But just those elements felt so peaceful and a complete sense of being at peace with death. And just going through the, well, if I die tomorrow, so be it, I'm at peace with it. Whereas before, I would just be in total panic about it. I'd resist it. I'd do everything to resist it. But also to me, better understanding death led me to better understand life. And it led me also to understand that it's important to live life to the fullest, but to live life according to who you are as well. And removing the element of fearing death allowed me to live life more, as simple as that. Be more adventurous with life because I'm not always thinking, "Oh, this or that," to just go and live your life. So that's it. The story, although the NDE itself was very short, it completely changed my perspective on death, and as a result, completely changed my perspective on life. And I just wish that everyone could have that moment where they remove completely the fear of death, although I believe it's very personal, individual, and unique to each person. But I'm pretty certain as a society worldwide, if we had a complete change of belief about the way we see death, we could change a lot about the way we operate as a society, the way we treat each other as individuals, and so on. And the big what if, I'm exploring that what if idea in the novel as a story because I think it's easier to share in that context and gives it a bit of fictional elements, which gives you more freedom to share the story that way. Thank you for listening to the story. Hope you enjoyed it.